In this video, I'm going to show you how you can create a custom function in VBA through which you can extract numbers from an alphanumeric string. So what do I mean by that? If you take a look at the screen, I have a data comprising of both numbers and integers, which is an alphanumeric string. And if I call my function, which is fx extract numbers, and I pass in the argument, which is alphanumeric string, and then I specify the kind of modification I want to do over that alphanumeric string. So I have two options: either I can sum or I can concatenate all of those numbers, and the result and the return type of that string would be an integer. And I can specify I want to do the sum and make sure that the row reference is absolute and the column is relative, and the column is relative in the first argument and the row is absolute in the second one. And if I press enter, you can see that I have the sum of all of those integers or the numbers that I have in the alphanumeric string. And similarly, I can return a concatenated version of that string of those numbers. So all I need to do is just drag the function towards the right, and you can see I have a concatenation of those integers that I have in my alphanumeric string. So I have 1 2 3 0 0 1 3, and then I can simply drag that formula downwards for the other row, and I have received my result. And not only that, we will also have the option of explicitly mentioning either if we want to do sum or just concatenate. So if I copy the formula from cell and then enter in this cell, all I need to do is just change the cell references, and instead of mentioning a cell reference this time, I'm going to write sum and make sure that the column is absolute in this case. And if I drag the formula towards right, I need to write concatenate, and we have the result similar to the one that we have received in the previous example. And then I can just simply drag the formula downwards and I will have my either sum or concatenate. And not only that, even if the user forgets to explicitly mention the type of modification you want to do over that string, you can just simply press enter and you will receive the sum of those numbers. And all of that we are going to do through the VBA. So let's get started, and I will show you how you can do it through a custom function. Let's head over to the Visual Basic and start writing our code. So first thing that you need to do is right click on the Project Explorer and click on Insert and insert a new module. And the first thing that you need to write is function fx extract numbers. So this will be the function that we are going to call from the Excel environment. Now we need to pass certain parameters that the user is going to provide to the function so that they can calculate either sum or the concatenation of that integers. The first parameter is target cell as range, and the last parameter is an optional one. So we are going to write optional sum or concatenate as string, and the default value of this parameter would be sum. So meaning if in case user doesn't specify any argument, then the default operation would be a sum of those numbers that are in that string. And the function would return a data type of long, or basically a numeric data type. I'm using long because there is a possibility that the final result that is being returned by this function could be higher than the number that we can store in the integer data type. Now we need to declare certain variables. So first one is dim x as integer, and we are going to declare another variable which is dim current text as string. So the idea is to loop over all of those values of that alphanumeric string and check if the currently iterated value is a number or not. So let me show you how we can do that. So you need to write for x is equal to 1 to the length of target cell dot value. So in case if there are 10 characters in the string that is available in Excel, the loop will continue for 10 times, checking each string of that alphanumeric string and we just need to close the for loop. And in the current text we need to specify mid target cell dot value comma x comma 1. So what would be the role of that current text? In the current text we are storing the currently iterated value. So let me just go to Excel to make it more clear. So if we are at a, then the value iterated by x would be a, then we will have 1 and 2 and n and t and so on. So that is what mid function will retrieve. It will assign each string at every loop of the x to the current text variable. The next thing that we need to check is if the currently iterated text is a number or not, and for that we need to write an if condition, and I can say if is numeric current text, then if the current value is numeric, then we want to do something and just close the if statement. Now we need to declare two new variables. So the first one is dim counter as long, and the other one is dim temp array as variant. So the use of those two variables is that every time we encounter a number, we are going to increment the counter variable, and the use of temp array is that every time we get a number, we are going to store it in a array, or in a easy way you can say in a temporary area in memory. So each time we get a number, we are going to insert that number in that temporary array, and then later on we are going to use that array to do all sorts of operations. So the first thing that we need to do is, now that we have found an integer, so I'm going to say counter is equal to counter plus 1. So counter starts with 0, and then we have encountered our first number, and then this time the counter will be equal to 1. The next thing to do is type redim preserve temp array 1 to counter. So what the redim preserve statement would actually do is, every time we encounter a number, it will increment the upper bound of the temp array by 1. So let's say when we start, the temp array would be blank, it would be empty, it would not have anything. So once we encounter the first number, the redim preserve statement would increase the bound of the temp array, and now the temp array would have a storage area so that it can contain a one character, one string, or one something. And each time we get a new number, we are going to keep incrementing so that we can store all of those numbers that we have extracted from that alphanumeric string. And that is what redim preserve statement is actually doing. Preserve is the keyword that will preserve all of those values that we have already assigned to that array, and redim would basically redimension that temp array again and again for each value or each number that we encounter. The next thing is to write temp array counter equal to current text. So now that we have encountered our first integer, we have redimensioned the array, we are going to store that number in the first position of the temp array. So let me just correct the spelling of temp array. Now let's see how the temp array actually looks like, and for that I'm going to create a temporary subroutine so that we can loop over that subroutine and see how that temp array is being populated with all those integer values. And before we move ahead, I need to make a small correction to my previous code. I need to insert an opening and closing parentheses after the temp array. And now let's copy the code of the function and let's duplicate it, and make sure that the name of the function or the subroutine is not ambiguous, because we cannot have same two subroutines or functions with the same name. So let's change function to subroutine, and you can remove all of those arguments and the data type returned by the function that we have provided, and let's close the parentheses. And instead of passing the target cell dot value, just for this example I'm going to pass the explicit string. So I'm going to copy the string and replace the target cell dot value, and I'm going to change the value here as well, even though this is not a best practice of repeating the same thing again and again, but for this example it will suffice. So the next thing to do is go to the View tab and bring up the locals window. This will help us in seeing how the temp array is being populated. Okay, so let's start stepping into the code by pressing F8. So the first character that we have encountered is A. A is not a number, so if is going to skip that check, and the code between the if statement is not executed. Now moving on, the next character is 1. 1 is a number, so it will pass the check of the if. We are going to increment the counter by 1 and the counter variable now becomes 1. Now we are going to redeem preserve the temp array, which means we are going to increase the bound of the temporary array that we have created, and now we are going to store the value of the currently iterated text that we have received. So let's see what is being stored in the temp array. Once I execute this code, you can see that 1 is being stored in the temp array. Now moving on, let's press F8 couple of times and see what we get. So on expanding temp array, you can see that we have actually entered 1 and 2 so far. So let's move and see how many values we can get. So you can see that so far we have received 5 values, and this is how the temp array would be populated for all of those integers that we encounter in that alphanumeric string. So I hope this actually makes it clear how the temp array is being populated. And before we move ahead back to the code, I just wanted to make sure that you understand why I have used the preserve statement. So if I remove the preserve statement, you would see okay, so we need to start once again. So let's start and run this code couple of times. So what happened here? So the first time the temp array was filled with a number was 1, but the next time we encountered another number, we didn't have the preserve statement, so we didn't preserve all of that data that we previously had in the temp array variable, and that is the reason why we are seeing empty in the first element of the temp array variable. So this is one of the reasons why we have to use redeem preserve keyword, so that we continue to add on new data, but we do not replace the data that already exists in the temp array variable. I hope that is clear now. Now we can just stop this subroutine and remove this code, and going back to the function, the next thing to do is, let me just close the locals window first of all, and now we are going to declare the upper bounds and the lower bound of the temp array. So lower bound would be the first position of the temp array, or the first index number of the temp array, and the upper bound would be the last index in that temp array, if I have to explain in the easiest manner. So for that we need to declare 2 variables. So that would be dim start num as long and dim and num as long. Now that we have declared the variables, let's set their values. So I'm going to say start num is equal to lbound temp array comma 1. Comma 1 basically means the first dimension of the temp array. It is not necessary. If you want to exclude that 1, you can do it, but it is my personal preference, so I'm going to write 1. It makes me realize that this is only a one-dimensional array. So now we can write endnum is equal to ubound temp array comma 1. Now that we have specified the starting index and the ending index of the temp array, we can move ahead with the last part of our code, which is basically just to check if the user has specified sum or concatenate in the optional argument of our function. And for that we need to first of all check if L case sum or con, I'm going to use the IntelliSense to autocomplete, is equal to concatenate. Then let me just close the end if statement. The reason for using L case is that in case if user specifies it in a camel case or irregular cases. So we have some kind of check that ensures that the string, the input that the user has provided matches the input that we are using to compare it against. And the next thing we need to do is create a new loop, and for that I'm going to write for x is equal to start num to end num. In this example I'm just going to reuse the x variable that I have used previously, because after this part of the code there is no actually use of the x from this loop, so there is no issue in using the x variable again and again. And then I can just write next x. Now once the code starts to iterate, we need to store that the value in something. Now we can move ahead and declare another variable in which we will store the value that we are currently iterating in the temp array variable. So the variable's name would be result, dim result as a variant. The reason for choosing the variant option is that in case of concatenate, initially the data type of the number or the variable would be string, and in case of sum, initially the data type would be integer or long. So let's start writing our code. So I'm going to say result equal to result and percent temp array x. So what we are basically saying is result equal to result and itself plus the currently iterated value of the temp array, and this will be the result we will get in case if the user selects concatenate, and in case if they do select sum, we are going to check for else if case sum or concatenate equal to sum, then, and let's close the end if statement, and we are going to write the same loop once again. So let me just copy the code to make it easy, and let's indent it. And instead of joining those numbers, all we need to do is just simply add those numbers by using the symbol and the plus symbol. And before that we need to make sure that we are converting the values inside the temp array to a data type that is suitable for summing the values, and I'm using the clng operation, which basically converts any number that is stored as a text back into a number. The next thing that we need to do is make sure that in case if the user provides any other option instead of sum or concatenate, we are not proceeding with the code. And in case, let's say if there is a spelling mistake in sum or concatenate, we will exit the function. This is kind of a safety check or capturing the error that might occur. So for that I need to write inside the final if statement, I'm going to write else exit function. That's it. And before completing or exiting the code, we need to make sure that the function actually returns something, and in this case I'm going to copy it, the name of the function, and then assign it the value of the result. So in case if user selects concatenate, the result would be a join of all those numbers, and in case if the user selects sum or writes sum, the function would return the sum of all those numbers that are included in the alphanumeric string. Now it is time to test the code that we have written, and let's get back to Excel and see if it is working or not. So let me just clear the cell, and I'm going to write fx extract numbers. In the first argument I need to provide the cell reference of the alphanumeric string, and then I can provide the kind of operation that I want to do on this string, and make sure that the rows are absolute and the column is relative. And in case of cell reference of the alphanumeric string, the column is absolute and the row is relative, and let's press OK. So before that we need to make sure that the variable name is correct. So this one is end num. Let me just stop it and we can start once again, and I need to correct it once again. Hopefully it will work this time. So going back to Excel, before that let's stop the code and Yes, it is now working. The sum of all those numbers is actually 10, and you can sum it yourself as well. Now drag the code towards the right, and you can see we have received the concatenated numbers. And let's drag the code downwards, and it is now summing, plus we have received the concatenated number. And let's do the same for the next example. So fx extract numbers, make sure that the column reference is absolute and row is relative, and I'm going to type sum. Let's see if it works or not. Yes, it works. So now let's drag the code towards right, and I need to make sure that instead of sum I write concatenate, and yes, it is working, and that's it. So both our scenarios are now covered, and it is working for both the scenarios in case if the user decides to provide different types of input. So that was all for this video. I hope you have enjoyed this video, and I will see you in the next one.